Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 27th of September 2024. We're going to go to military aid and assistance. We're going to start with the $50 billion loan funded by frozen Russian assets that is to be received soon. According to Canada's Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland. Despite uncertainty over the timing, Freeland assured that discussions on the technical details are advancing. Now, remember, there are two things going on here in terms of these massive loans that are connected to the frozen Russian assets. There's a loan that appears to be coming from the G7, and I think that is what is being discussed here. And there's one that's the $50 billion one from the EU that is being loaned to Ukraine, and the loan repayments are actually coming from the profits to the frozen Russian assets, so that actually Ukraine doesn't have to repay that. I presume this is what the form of the G7 loan will be as well. And obviously that's really great because that's in total sort of $100 billion. Really useful. There's a bit of a caveat though in terms of, this is what Bloomberg says. So Ukraine's allies are strapped for cash and arms supplies are at risk. Okay, and we talked yesterday about how the UK arms manufacturing at the moment is not matching what we have given and what we need strategically for ourselves and also for our partners such as Ukraine. And that's going to be the same around the world with the allies supporting Ukraine, because no one's been bold enough to get onto a proper war footing. France has done a few things in terms of that, but essentially we've been a bit, Now, arms deliveries to Ukraine in 2025 are under threat due to the refusal to increase financial aid and a lack of funds from allies, according to Bloomberg. The publication notes that even if the G7 countries provide Ukraine with a $50 billion loan secured by Russian assets, this will still not be enough to cover Kyiv's needs for the next year. Quote, the dynamics show that Russia's economy has switched to a war footing while Ukraine's allies have not. So Russia is able to switch its entire economic setup to be on a war economy footing, and that means that they can dedicate their entire kind of economy, their entire existence, everything to prosecuting this war in Ukraine. And allies aren't willing to do that for kind of obvious reasons. Like, you feel we're not at war. Why would we get onto a war footing that could screw our economy over? It might be beneficial for winning this war, but it's going to screw us over. And actually, that's not going to go down well with our electorate, who don't necessarily understand the seriousness of the problem that we have. And that gives an advantage to Russia. But yeah. Right, Colby Badwai here says the Department of Defense has released details of the $2.4 billion USAI package. This is the form of funding from the US that allows the US to order from mainly their defense industry and send that kit when it's made out to Ukraine. It's not taken from US stockpiles. So coming from that will be munitions and support for Ukrainian air defense systems. I am unsure whether the Patriot battery that was mentioned yesterday, I don't know whether that's coming from Presidential Drawdown Authority, one that's in deep stocks that they're going to refurbish. I think that's probably the case, rather than a new Patriot battery that is being ordered. The question is, why wasn't one ordered? Why wasn't any of this done months and months and months ago? There are those claiming that this is sort of this is all part of. There are lots of theories as to why it's suddenly happened now. Basically, you can go and find them. Whether it's political, strategic, has a kind of military dimension to it or not, I don't know. Anyway, from the USAI, munitions and support for Ukraine's air defense systems, air-to-ground munitions, unmanned aerial systems, so drones and components to support Ukrainian production of drones, counter-drone equipment, unmanned surface vehicles, so that's drones for the sea, secure comms equipment and material to support Ukrainian munitions production, and spare parts maintenance and sustainment support and other ancillary equipment. So nothing crazy big there, although air-to-ground munitions are going to be super useful. Munitions and support for Ukrainian air defense systems, that's going to be ordering mainly interceptors, I would have thought, and making sure that the Patriots that they have are up to scratch, etc., etc. Quite a bit of counter-drone and drone equipment being ordered there. That could be very significant. This kind of electronic warfare domain is super important, and the top US entities will have this technology and knowledge that Ukraine desperately want and need, but many nations such as the US have been reluctant to give it to them because it's kind of proprietary knowledge and really advanced tech that will allow them to have the competitive advantage over others. If they give that to Ukraine, then they are essentially giving away a competitive advantage, especially if it gets into the hands of the Russians, etc., etc. Right. Zelensky has left Washington without securing permission to use long-range Western missiles to strike deep into Russia, despite meeting with Biden and Harris and a plea to lift restrictions on British Storm Shadows and US-made ATACMS. It's unfortunately unsuccessful. Western nations currently only allow Ukraine to target Russian forces in border regions. This is an ongoing situation that may be course-corrected or it may not. And even if it is course-corrected, it could be a long time away. We'll come to that in a second. Now, US officials are telling the New York Times that the intelligence community believes that Russia will escalate kinetically against NATO if Ukraine is allowed to conduct deep strikes. The same people who thought that Kyiv would fall in 3 days now think that Putin wants a war with NATO and when he can't beat Ukraine. So there are some issues going on here. Like, if the US intelligence genuinely believes this, then first of all, they kind of believe stuff that was massively wrong last time, at the beginning of the war, is Colby's point there. But also, it is insane to think that Russia are really going to go and do that when NATO would just kick their asses really relatively quickly. Just that there is this fear of Russian escalation. I get it. You don't want to get it wrong. But I don't think you're justified in thinking Russia will actually do that. No report says US intelligence agencies believe that Russia is likely to retaliate with greater force against the US and its coalition partners, possibly with lethal attacks, if they agree to give the Ukrainians permission to employ US, British, and French supplied long-range missiles to strike deep into Russia, officials said. So, this is the belief of kinetic escalation. So they could be like Russian strikes on US. Really, that's not going to happen. Now, Biden, a bit more confirmation what we heard yesterday. This is coming from the White House. Biden will lead a meeting on Ukraine's defense in the Ramstein format on October the 12th in Germany. According to the White House, it was stated that the president is determined to provide Kyiv with the necessary support for victory. This is good sounding rhetoric, and I'm happy that Biden's going to go there and that this is serious for him. At least it appears so. Again, why haven't they lifted restrictions? And part of the reason why I think they haven't lifted restrictions is because it's this whole discussion is happening out in bloody public. Should never have been in public. And as a result, the stakes have been artificially ameliorated, or no, it increased. It should never have been discussed in public. It should have been done on the quiet, and nothing would have happened if it just was the case that Ukraine suddenly struck some air bases deep into Russian territory. We've got a decision to lift restrictions on Ukraine's use of Western long-range weapons being made possibly in early winter, was what was expressed by British Foreign Secretary David Lammy. Now, he's been really strong. Like, the British, for example, and I assume the French too, couldn't be any clearer. Like, we want the Ukrainians to be able to use Storm Shadows. This is not the fault of the British or the French. This is a US thing. And it's deeply frustrating to think it could happen be made by early winter. And that's 2 months away. By which time there really won't be many targets left in that kind of range. It's just insane. Now, worries the UN lacks the funds needed to help Ukraine through the winter. This is AFP, Agence France Presse. The reality is that the funding situation for organisations like ours is far too low at this time of the year. We are 47% funded, says UNHCR's representative in Ukraine, Carolina Lindholm-Billing. Now, apparently last year at this stage they were 70% funded, so they are lagging behind previous benchmarks. That is a worry. On the other hand, Vietnam has pledged to support Ukraine with $500,000 of humanitarian aid. This is incredible considering Vietnam was visited by Putin, and then the Americans went there, and then we've just had a meeting. I was talking yesterday about how all these meetings that Zelensky was involved in, my goodness, he's the busiest politician that's ever lived. Honestly, he should go down in history as a great, great politician. The hardest working politician. It's tough when you're almost 3 years into war and you're still at this stage. But my goodness, he's worked hard for that, for Ukraine. Now, he met with Vietnam at the UN, and you've got to think, right, there's only a certain finite amount of time to have these meetings, and you could meet with anyone. Why meet with Vietnam? We talked about this yesterday, and of course, everything fits into the strategic understanding, and this one I think was, trying to wrest Vietnam away from the sphere of influence of Russia. This will be in the US's best interest, I would have thought, in that kind of Indo-Pacific dimension. And he was meeting with Turkey, India, all of these really incredibly important movers and shakers, and also Vietnam. Interesting. But 500,000 in humanitarian aid is definitely brilliant for them. When we were drafting teams for World War III, I never thought we would, said Jake Bro, we would be getting communist Vietnam on our side. But every single one of China's neighbours hates China, is what he says. So this is all part of a larger, he met with Vietnam as part of a much larger game of chess. And there was no kind of randomly, who should we meet with tomorrow? Vietnam, why not? I've never met them before. Let's do that. It's never going to be. There will be a lot of thought going into these schedules. Right, Swedish Scanjack 3500 mine clearing vehicle is being seen here, used by the 47th Engineer Brigade. I only say this because this is not a vehicle I think I've reported previously, and quite often we see vehicles and equipment on the front lines or near the front lines being used that we never knew went to Ukraine. Maybe I reported this, maybe we knew, but it's just, it's good news to know that there is equipment that goes to Ukraine that isn't always heralded and shouted about, etc., etc. This looks like a deminer that does have, it's not an automatic, it's not automated, it's not remote control or anything, but you can see how far away from the mine explosion that it's trying to trigger the driver would be, and there's a lot of metal in the way there. So that's probably how that thing works. And then just to remind you that the UK are providing, it's being reported quite a lot today, in the process of delivering another 16 AS-90 155mm self-propelled howitzers, beating the new government's pledge to deliver 12 within the first 100 days in office. So just to remind you of that, they have given over 80 units to Ukraine, and they are on track to send the entirety of their AS-90 fleet as they phase them out. Right, I love this because I use Grammarly. I use it in my writing when I use the word add-in, which is really, really good. Amazing meeting in Kiev with Grammarly CEO, who... what's his name? I don't know what his actual name is there. But Grammarly is a company with Ukrainian roots and a top donor to United 24. Interesting. Our joint priority, the development of an artificial intelligence. Big projects are ahead. Thanks for the visit. Again, making these connections with tech companies. Ukraine is, of course, a hotbed of technological knowledge and entities. There was certainly before the war, and that would, I'm sure, be one of their objectives post-war in terms of where they want to position themselves in the world, needing that inward investment, etc., etc. Okay, Antony Blinken is to hold talks with Chinese counterpart amid worries that China's drone assistance to Russia is becoming an issue. And the Secretary of State is meeting the Chinese Foreign Minister on the 27th, that's today, during the UN General Assembly in New York. So that is reflective of how serious this is. I personally think this is one of the biggest issues in the war right now, is the amount that China is or potentially might help Ukraine, is helping or might help Ukraine. So that is an important meeting there. Right, thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate your support. Take care, peeps. I'm off for a well-deserved cup of tea. If you think that the amount of words pumped out lifts the level of desserts, just desserts for a cup of tea. And I've spoken a lot of words today, and dagnam it, Yorkshire tea is coming. See you later.